The Chicano movement of the 1960s, also called the Chicano Civil Rights Movement, encompassed issues such as restoration of land grants, farm workers' rights, enhanced education and voting and political rights. In the 1960s, Chicano was accepted as a symbol of self-determination and ethnic pride. Chicano nationalism was influenced by the Black Civil Rights Movement and by the end of the U.S.-Mexican War in 1848, when the current U.S.-Mexican border took form. Many Mexicans now call themselves Chicanos and Chicanas and joined the Chicano movement to improve socioeconomic conditions and win full recognition of their rights as a U.S. citizen. Cesar Chavez, one of the most well-known leaders of the Chicano movement, began his legacy in 1946 when he joined the National Farm Labor Union. In 1952, Chavez was recruited into the Community Service Organization and became director in 1958. However, he quit because some members wanted to focus on urban and middle-class concerns. In 1962, 4 years after he quit, Chavez founded the United Farm Workers, a labor union created from the merging of two groups, the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee and the National Farm Workers Association. The United Farm Workers fought for higher wages, better working conditions, and more rights for migrant farm workers. The Delano strike on September 8, 1965 was a strike against local grape growers for higher wages, better working conditions, and recognition as a union. Chavez was acknowledged as a leader of the strike because of his union's superior numbers and his determination, although initiated by Filipino leader Larry Itliong of the AWOC.
Land grant movement of 1962 was held to restore the New Mexican land grants to their rightful owners. Reyes Lopez Tijerina investigated the original land grant titles from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and formed the Federal Alliance of Land Grants in 1962 to publish his investigations. In 1966, they marched from Santa Fe to Albuquerque to petition but were suppressed. By the 1960s, the Chicanos were the second largest oppressed nationality in the U.S. They were exploited for horrible wages since they couldn't speak English and discriminated against based on their culture. As a result, they formed groups such as the National Farm Workers Association led by Cesar Chavez and held movements such as the previously mentioned Delano movement to rally back at these injustices. Was a political party founded in South Texas by Jose Angel Gutierrez in 1970. The goals of this included increasing the number of Chicano candidates and the number of voter registrations. In 1975, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was also extended to Hispanic Americans. Catolicos por la Raza, or Catholics for Chicano People, was an extension of the early movements in LA. It was comprised of three groups: the Chicano Law Students Association at Loyola, La Raza newspaper, and the United Mexican American Students. This association backed the activist movements because there was more authority by political baptism of the church. The 1946 case of Mendez versus Westminster was the first case of segregation challenge. The Mendez family sent their kids to school but found out they would have to attend separate schools. Mexicans, although legally white, were discriminated against based on ancestry and language deficiency. The court ruled that it was a violation of the 14th Amendment and that the school's actions violated the California law.
Anti-war marches were created in the late 1960s in Los Angeles, Denver, San Francisco, and helped lay the basis for the unprecedented outpouring of La Raza to end the Vietnam War on August 29, 1970. 30,000 people marched while additional tens of thousands lined the streets to watch.
Another important figure in the movement is Salvador B. Castro, who was a Mexican-American educator and activist in East LA. His leadership was effective and empowering in trying to ensure educational justice for the Chicano minority. He gave his students hope and faith in themselves to succeed and go to college, and encouraged them to organize walkouts, which were known as the East LA Blowouts. These series of 1968 protests were carried out by students concerned with the quality of their education because of the prejudices and stereotyping they faced from teachers, politicians, and media. More than 15,000 students walked out of their classes to fight for their rights. They were blocked by administrators and police officers and either jailed or escorted to their principals. The walkouts escalated from peaceful demonstrations with little effect to more violent protests filled with police brutality. The whole community eventually joined the movement, which forced the school board to discuss demands imposed upon them by the students about the unfair educational system that justified the high dropout rates of Chicano students. A few groups were critical in initiating and staging the walkouts. The United Mexican Students and the Mexican American Youth Organization were groups that developed in universities and colleges and led by determined student leaders. To fight for civil rights, they focused on cultural nationalism and used the technique of mass demonstration to protest. The Brown Berets were also known as the Young Chicanos for Community Action, was a Chicano nationalist political extremist group that is still active to present day. Their main focus was to organize against police brutality and to advocate for educational equality. Members of the group wore brown berets that were considered a symbol of unity and opposition of discrimination.
The Chicano Civil Rights Movement, also known as El Movimiento, began in the 1940s with the goal of achieving social liberation. The Chicano Civil Rights Movement had a variety of issues such as restoration of land grants, farm workers' rights, enhanced education, and voting and political rights. A major part of the Chicano movement was the arts, which included visual art, music, literature, dance, and theater. Chicano artists created a bicultural style that included U.S. and Mexican influences. The Mexican style can be found by their use of bright colors and expressionism. Chicano literature are written by Mexican Americans who live in the United States. It can be dated all the way back to the 1800s. Chicano literature focuses on themes such as identity, discrimination, culture, and history with an emphasis on validating Chicano culture in the United States. The Chicano movements not only made an impact on the past society, but it was made into a legacy. The Chicano movement was a cultural and political movement that helped to create new transnational cultural identities and fueling a renaissance in a visual, literary, and performing arts way.